Oops, I did that before the camera started. Welcome to my NU Digital Classroom students, CHSF 2106. I love you. I hope you're doing well. Honestly, big time behind on email. I know a lot of you sent really nice intro messages, and honestly, I have them all in a folder, and I just need an hour or two where I can just sit down and write a nice response to all of you, and please know that's coming. Um, you've been a very welcoming and warm bunch, and if you haven't written yet, all that some people did was just like send me a little email just kind of saying who they are and what kind of interests them about psychology, and it's cool because I actually am gonna I've read them all. I just haven't responded to them all because well, to be honest, because I didn't want to just give a one-word answer. I wanted to use those very nice and polite messages as an opportunity to like say something back to you. And actually, this leads me to sort of this idea that today what I'm going to do with this presentation is sort of do the first half of it and rip it and upload it to YouTube so that you can see it. And then these next couple of days, I'm going away. I'm going up to Parry Sound to get one last couple nights of camping in with the family. So I'm not going to bring my computer, but I will bring my cell phone. And I was thinking, like, if I get a nice opportunity, I might send out some email responses then and stuff. And if not, I'll get to it early next week because then next Monday or Sunday night, maybe when I get home, I'll finish up and do the second part of this. Okay, so chapter 2 is going to be a part 1 and part 2. And in this chapter, this has been the longest intro ever, but that's just a little bit of shouting out that first of all, if you're waiting for an email back from me, I know that, and it's high on my priority list, but a little bit higher on the priority list just for functional moving forward as the class was to get you some of this part 2. Okay, so you've had chapter 1. This is gonna be chapter 2. Chapter 3 will be coming near the end of next week, and that's gonna be the first one that you're quizzed on. And then after this week, we're gonna start quizzing on the chapters. Okay, so there's no quiz for chapter 1 or 2. These are setting the stage. I would like you to take notes and stuff. I shouldn't have said that right at the beginning because now if I check my YouTube stats, everyone's going to sign out at 2:20. But I hope you stay around and watch this presentation. I'm going to try to get into a real honest look at these biological beginnings and what does that even mean and what are you biologically. We talk all the time about nature and nurture. Okay, let's give nurture its due today. We spend day and night talking about influences of nurture in our society, and there's reasons for that. There's all kinds of environmental influences on us, everything from parenting to schooling to religious influences to media to social media. But what is it influencing? Well, it's influencing your biopsychological self. Welcome to chapter 2. I love you. Thanks for coming, and let's get into this. So here, I'll show this up. So I tried to do it like this so that because I know like presentation wise, if I was like making this perfectly crafted, every piece would come up like while I'm saying it. But I know that actually some of you are taking quite comprehensive notes from these, so I want to actually play into your note taking strategy too. So anyways, blah blah blah. I'm just gonna put them all up at one time. So when we're talking about the biological beginnings of you, it forces us to pause and ask some fundamental questions around like, what does it even mean to be human and be alive and be an organic organism that experiences our life largely as thoughts, but that we all know we're more than that? Like so much of our mental experiences, or so much of our life is shaped by our mental experience. And we underestimate how much things like physical and emotional energies shape that thought process. Who are you? Who will you be? What is, and if who you are and what you will be is different, well, what? What's that mean? And what would make that change happen? And why do you get old? And we can talk about that like cellularly. Why? What is aging? And is there limits? And okay, so just to get off topic immediately, if we were to be able to keep a human being alive longer, what would we need to do? the answer to that's pretty easy. It's basically lungs, heart, brain. So if we can keep your lungs, heart, and your brain alive, if you're being like really reductionist, everything else is sort of details. It's like there's good thought that, well, we know that you can have lung replacements, and you can have, we could say we could keep your lungs and heart really strong. Heart transplants are obviously hardcore, serious, but possible. So it's like, say if we could keep your lungs and heart really strong, could you live forever? And there's a lot of evidence to suggest no, and that maybe, and again, I'm just kind of floating this out there. We'll get to this much later in the course, but maybe some of the reasons we see so much Alzheimer's and dementia is related to the fact that people are living longer than before. And it's interesting because like the age range of humans seems to cap somewhere around 120, and it's like that doesn't seem to be changing historically too much. You can maybe find an example. I don't know. I should have looked it up before I started talking here. The oldest person ever, but I'm just gonna guess it's probably like in the low 120s. Now, of course, there's going to be reports from what I would call like old time, like, more than, you call it biblical time, but you can even look at it outside of a religious context. Like, of course, there's stories from all around the world of ancient people living longer. But like, oh, I'm cutting myself off. I could keep ranting. But like, let's just say for argument's sake, 120. What's interesting isn't that people are, the potential for you to get old there is increasing. Like, it's not like 100 years ago was 110, and then 100 years before that was like 100. It's been at 120 for a while. But what's interesting is what's changing is the amount of people getting closer to that. So the amount of people that are experiencing their 80s and their 90s, and this is having effect all over the place. Like, even just think of what might not jump to your mind right away, but something like retirement benefits, and this idea of like retiring at 65, and if you're expecting to live till 20, so then, till 80, so then from the retirement age to for the rest of your life is 15 years, but if you're expecting to live to 110, right now all of a sudden it's what, like 45 years. Now just think about if that's happening to like millions of Canadians at the same time. And this is something in Conestoga, I teach a class on sociology, and I have a whole lecture called The Graying of Canada, and it's like, it's a real issue that Canada's facing, is that our population is getting much older, and why it's such a huge problem is because what pays for everything, and again, I couldn't be more off topic, so sorry, I'll get back. What pays for everything in a country is people paying taxes, right? Everything's either people paying taxes or government taking loans. So anyways, back to the point. Why do we grow old? This is what got me on that rant. Why do we like the things we do? Why do we die? And it might seem interesting to like ask this idea about mortality and old age, and then, have that on the other side of it, the why do we die, and then throw in the middle, why do we like the things we do? It seems like that's a smaller question, but it's actually not. From a developmental and evolutionary and biological psychology perspective, your preferences is one of the most interesting things about you. Why do we not all like this, our coffee prepared the same way? Why don't we all have the same toppings on a cheeseburger? Evolution would almost suggest that we would be programmed to like things that are similar, but maybe not. Maybe that's an overly simplistic understanding of evolution. Maybe differences in, evolutionary terms, in mutations in behavior, or the fact that people behave differently makes some people more likely to be successful in certain environments, and this is this goodness of fit, or what Darwin originally would have called survival of the fittest. And it's not the fittest, it's the best fit. And sometimes that is the fittest. Sometimes it's the ability to go the longest without water. Sometimes it's the ability to form social bonds. And it's almost like the survival of the most loving, not the fittest at a certain level, because it's like, in a lot of environments, it's your ability to form resource sharing communities. Especially if we're looking at like human history. There's not a lot of species that do resource sharing Well, that's actually not true. I can actually think of a bunch right off the top of my head, so maybe that's not a good example. But one of the things that's so interesting, because like chimps share resources, orca whales share resources, elephants share resources. You know, you can even think of, in some ways, things like dogs and cats in simpler forms. But this whole idea of, you know, to jump back to the slide, why we are different. It's actually an interesting question. What makes some better at? I wonder if I should restart that slide. That rant got a little off pace, but I think if you're following along, I think you're still with me. What makes some people better at things than others? I'm trying to also, just as a side note, get to the point where I don't redo slides, where I'm not like so paranoid about myself that I have to do everything 50 times. It's like, I'm going to make the assumption that you know I'm not like a professional YouTuber. I'm like a teacher that's like recording himself on like my own little computer that freezes sometimes, and I'm going to do my best. And, you know, all I ask from you is curiosity. Let's try to have an interesting class. What makes some people better at some things than others? Right? It's like all these individual differences. It would almost be easier to explain if everyone was the same. That's how I got on that rant. I got started talking about mutations. Alright, biological beginnings. Let's keep going.
Life. With an estimated 3.8 billion years of existence and evolution on Earth, it's an odd thing indeed. So how did we get here? And what would the Earth's 4.5 billion year timeline look like compressed into a normal day of 24 hours? The story begins early in the morning, around 4 a.m., with the rise of the first simple, single-celled organisms. However, these organisms are destined to spend quite some time alone. At 1 p.m., a simple cell engulfs another, creating a symbiotic relationship and the first eukaryotic cells, or cells with internal organs. At 6:30 p.m., these cells begin to form colonies, and thus the first multicellular life develops. But it isn't until 8:30 p.m. that sea plants appear, and 20 minutes later we suddenly see animal life erupt in an explosion of inventiveness. Jellyfish, the first true vertebrates, trilobites. Incredible diversification begins to take place, and just before 10 p.m., plants begin to appear on land, followed by land mammals. By 1024, the Earth is covered in carboniferous forests, and the first winged insects appear. Many reptiles dominate the land with less than an hour left, but a mass extinction event allows dinosaurs to storm the scene and remain until 11:41 p.m. when they too suddenly vanish. And so begins the age of mammals. In the last few minutes, apes split from the old world monkeys, and with only 1 minute and 17 seconds left before midnight, humans emerge. All of the recorded human history fits within a few seconds, an individual life lasting barely an instant. All a culmination of 3.8 billion years of life. This ASAP Science video was made possible by the support of Audible.com. With their help, we're able to continue making fun science videos, and they want to give you a free audiobook. Audible is the internet's leading provider of audiobooks with more than 100,000 downloadable titles across all different types of literature, including fiction, nonfiction, and periodicals. Just go to audible.com/ASAP to get a free audiobook of your choice. Today's episode was inspired by the book A Short History of Nearly Everything, in which Bill Bryson explores the neatest bits of science, my personal recommendation. Again, just head over to audible.com/ASAP to download it for free or another audiobook of your choice. And subscribe for more weekly science videos.
So that's a cool video, eh? But if you're sitting there like, I'm in a university class, what am I doing listening to a commercial for Audible? Sorry, I'm not like trying to push it on you. Although I wrote down that I wanted to say that, although that Bill Bryson book, A Short History of Everything, is an absolute classic. So I was just about to say, like, you know, sorry about the ad, but actually that ad is for a book that's like one of my all-time favorites. That's an awesome book. And if it's read by him, I would suggest it as an audiobook because he's hilarious. He's like the best funny. He might be the best like funny but informative writer that there is. And like he has a book called A Walk in the Woods. I think that's the one where it's about he basically walked the Appalachian Trail, which is this like monstrous trail. And like I think it took him like months. And I should have like looked it up. I'm just kind of freestyling right now, but yeah. But his book, A Short History of Everything, is speaks for itself. It's an absolute classic. So anyways, sorry about that. But the reason what I was starting to say here, oh man, I'm ranty today. But what I was starting to say there is that when I leave the ads in at the end and let it play the full video, then it doesn't seem to like hiccup, and also it makes it less likely to get banned. So anyways, back to the actual point of the lesson at hand. How else do you say it? Humans are new to the planet, right? It was like deep into 1159, or I believe in that video when humans show up. It's like, and that's just a, an attempt to illustrate the very hard to conceive idea of deep time. Deep time is the correct way of saying that. I think I called it old time before. Yeah, they call that deep time, like you could also call it prehistory. Right? Just think of how intense that word is, really, prehistory. And that sort of means like pre-writing and pre-tablets and stuff like that. So like you have in India, and you have in the Chinese culture, and in obviously the Greco-Roman world, and then more tablet form in like Mesoamerica, like what used to be called that, which would have been like the Incans and the Incas and the Mayan and the Aztec. So it's like all those cultures that recorded things is sort of what we would say is the start of history. And then that's not that long ago. That's like what, 9,000 years, 10,000 years. If you look around on this channel, you'll see that I have a big interest in human prehistory. I think it's the most interesting topic there is. But anyways, it maybe shouldn't surprise you that someone interested in developmental psych would be interested in evolutionary psych, because they're the same topic. They're just focused on different things, right? And you've heard me say this a few times, but I kind of want to hammer this point because I don't know how much your other teachers focus on this idea that evolution is the long game and development is your role in it, or one life's role in it. We share the DNA of the first. You carry it. Like that's like, yeah, you can pronounce that word just by not saying the E. We carry the history of all surviving DNA in our own. We share about 50% of the DNA of a banana. Now, that's just to throw out to you this idea. You'll hear people say like humans or whatever they say. I forget. I don't have the stat there, but I'm going to just make this up. Like 95% same DNA as chimps and stuff. And it's like, okay, but break down what that actually means. That, first of all, that 5% difference or whatever it is obviously highly significant. So if there's high levels of significance in any difference, then this whole idea of it's like almost the same except this little bit, it's like that's sort of just a interesting stat. But the point, sorry, to continue on that description. So like when you're comparing humans to chimps, for example, it's like our hearts are very similar, our lungs are very similar, we're anatomically obviously very similar, our fingers are very similar, like at a general sense, skeletally and all that kind of stuff. And it's like that's sort of what people are meaning. What makes us human isn't the fact that we're like made of we're all these like literally organic means carbon based. We're all carbon based, meaning that's like the main molecule, carbon life forms. It's what we consider, it's what we consider biology. Now again, if someone's coming from like, if there's like some 4th year biology student or something in this class, you might be getting annoyed by how casually I'm jumping between fields and using the language, but I'm trying to make this story of like, psych and biology are the same topic. It's just the topic of, psych and human biology, I'm kind of saying, that's where this is meeting. And it's like, obviously, if we're talking about the thought processing and emotions and being of a person, that who that person is embodied physiologically, biochemically matters. And yet, the most fascinating thing about you is that despite all of what I just said, each person's DNA is an individual. Your unique code. No, let me say, no, you're not your unique code expressed uniquely as you. You know, the most fascinating, your brain's the most fascinating piece of tissue in the known universe. Okay, so I want to just touch on Darwin. So this presentation is going to be a little bit video heavy compared to some of the other ones. And the reason for that is, well, first of all, with biology, like, it's hard to verbally explain something that you can show in an animation. Especially when we're talking a bit later today about, or a bit later next time, about things like mitosis and mitosis, and like basically how regular cells and the sex cells work, and like how we go from cells to DNA and fertilization and neural connectivity and all these kind of things that we're going to talk about. But I wanted to take this opportunity, and I've already kind of mentioned this idea that I'm going to do this in 2 parts. So I'm going to kind of do this slide. Then the next video is about Darwin, and it's an awesome video. There's like you'll notice there's like this little awkward part with the 2 bear animations. I don't know why they included, but overall it's the most dynamite video for explaining the absolute mechanics, the fundamental mechanics, I should say, of evolution. Alright, and then I'll just say a few words to kind of close up today, okay? So this one's going to be a little bit shorter. This is almost like to hopefully get you excited, or at least interested, and kind of introduce this idea of biological beginnings that I'm going to get into, and I'll probably, come out with part 2 Monday, or like even maybe Sunday. I'll probably record some of it Sunday as soon as I get home. I'm going to be thinking about this all weekend. I brought some selected reading to, and there's something just about being in nature too. I actually already have all my notes, but I'm just gonna kind of, what I like to do when I'm gonna do a lecture on something is like kind of prepare, but then also just kind of think about the general topic and read about kind of general ideas about it, and it's just kind of in that headspace. And this idea of humans being involved in this process of the evolution of life, and that this had a huge effect on how we perceive things, and how we speak, and how we behave and interact, and how we experience emotion, and how we experience relationship. And that there's these biophysiological, evolutionary drives. Now keep in mind, it's kind of interesting because Darwin and Freud, or Darwin's like a little bit before Freud. I believe Origin of Species comes out a little bit before Interpretation of Dreams, but it's, I might be wrong, but it's give or take a few years. They're kind of contemporary though, in a general sense. They're coming out at about the same time, and by the time they're both peaked, they're definitely big time aware of each other. The future generations will result from their own evolution, yeah. And Darwin reasoned that so he's doing this originally looking at the pigeons, as you're about to see in the next, the finches that you're about to see in the next video. Darwin reasoned that this intense, constant struggle for food, water, and resources must occur among the young of each generation, because many of them don't survive. Those that don't then reproduce. So he's saying, like, the ones that don't survive don't reproduce, and they don't pass on their genetic characteristics. Over many generations, organisms with the characteristics needed for survival make up an increasing percentage of the population. The term survival of the fittest refers to this ability to bear offspring that will survive long enough to bear offspring of their own, thus favoring the behaviors that increase reproductive success, that is, the ability to pass genes to the next generation. There's no assumption that any of this is conscious.
Mechanisms of evolution. What is evolution? Evolution is the development of life on Earth. This is a process that began billions of years ago and is still continuing to this day. Evolution tells us how it was possible for the enormous diversity of life to develop. It shows us how primitive protozoa could become the millions of different species that we see today. Evolution, then, is the answer to the question that we have all asked on seeing a Dachshund and a Great Dane together. How is it possible for ancestors to have descendants that look so very different to them? In answering this question, we want to focus on animals, excluding other forms of life such as fungi and plants. The first question to ask is therefore, how can one animal develop into a whole new species of animal? But just a quick question. What exactly is a species? A species is a community of animals that is capable of producing offspring with one another, with those offspring also being capable of reproducing in turn. To understand this answer better, we need to take a closer look at the following points. The uniqueness of living creatures guaranteed through the excess production of offspring and heredity, and, as a second key point, selection. Let's begin with uniqueness. Every creature that exists is unique, and this is essential for evolution. The members of a species may strongly resemble each other in appearance, however, they all have slightly different traits and characteristics. They may be a bit bigger, fatter, stronger, or bolder than their fellow animals. So what is the reason for these differences? Let's take a closer look at a creature. Every creature is made up of cells. These cells have a nucleus. The nucleus contains the chromosomes, and the chromosomes hold the DNA. DNA consists of different genes, and it's these genes that are life's information carriers. They contain instructions and orders for the cells and determine the characteristics and traits that living creatures have. And it's precisely this DNA that is unique to every creature. It's slightly different from individual to individual, which is why each has slightly different characteristics. But how is the enormous range of DNA created? One key factor is the excess production of offspring. In nature, we can observe that creatures generally produce far more offspring than is necessary for the survival of their species, with many offspring dying an early death as a result. Often there are even more offspring than the environment in which they live is able to support. This is one factor in increasing diversity within a species. The more offspring that are produced, the more little differences occur. And this is what nature wants: as many little differences as possible. The second major cause of the uniqueness of individuals occurs in heredity itself. By the way, heredity means the passing on of DNA to offspring. Two very interesting factors come into play in this process: recombination and mutation. Recombination is the random mixing of the DNA of two creatures. When two creatures fall in love and mate, they recombine their genes twice. The first time they do this separately, when they generate the gametes, that is, sperm and egg cells. The gametes take half of the genes and shuffle them. The second recombination occurs when a male inseminates a female. The parents each provide 50% of their DNA, in other words, 50% of their unique traits and characteristics. These are then recombined or mixed, and the result is new offspring. These offspring have a random mix of the DNA and therefore the traits and characteristics of their parents. This increases the diversity and differences within a species even further. But mutations are also important for evolution. Mutations are random changes in DNA. These can also be described as copying errors within the DNA, triggered by toxins or other chemical substances or by radiation. A mutation exists when a part of the DNA is altered. These changes are often negative and may result in illnesses such as cancer. However, they may also have neutral or positive effects, such as the blue eye color in humans, which is one such random mutation. In all cases, a mutation has to affect a gamete, that is a sperm or egg cell, because only the DNA in the gametes is passed on to the offspring. This is also the reason why we protect our sexual organs during X-rays, whilst other parts of the body are not at risk. In summary then, in the heredity process, creatures pass on their characteristics to their offspring in the form of DNA. Recombination and mutation change the DNA so that each child looks different to its siblings and receives a random mix of the characteristics of its parents. There's a key word here: random. All of these processes are based on chance. Random recombination and mutations result in individuals with random mixes of traits and characteristics, which in turn mix these randomly and pass them on. But how can so much be down to chance when all living creatures are so perfectly adapted to their environment? For example, the stick insect, the hummingbird, and the frogfish. The answer is provided by the second key point, selection. Each individual is subjected to a process of natural selection. As we have learned, each individual is somewhat different to its fellows, and there is extensive variation within a species. Environmental influences have an effect on living creatures. These so-called selection factors include predators, parasites, animals of the same species, toxins, changes in habitat, or the climate. Selection is a process that each individual is subjected to. Every creature has a unique mix of traits and characteristics. This mix helps them to survive in their environment, or not, as the case may be. Anyone with an unsuitable mix will be selected from the environment. Those with the right mix survive and can pass on their enhanced traits and characteristics. This is why diversity is so important. This is why creatures make so much effort to produce offspring that are as different as possible. They increase the likelihood that at least one of their offspring passes nature's selection process. They maximize their chances of survival. A good example of this can be seen in a group of finches living on a remote island. They are some of the most famous animals in the world of science and are known as Darwin finches after their discoverer, Charles Darwin. And this is the story of those finches. A few hundred years ago, a small group of finches was blown onto the Galapagos Islands in the middle of the Pacific, probably by a big storm. The finches found themselves in an environment that was completely new to them, a real finch paradise, an abundance of food, and no predators. They reproduced rapidly and numerously. The islands were soon heaving with finches. This meant that food supplies became increasingly scarce. The finch paradise was threatened with famine, and finch friends became competitors. This is when selection intervened. Their individuality and small differences, in this case their slightly different beaks, meant that some of the birds were able to avoid competing with their fellow finches. The beaks of some of the finches were more suitable for digging for worms. Other finches were able to use their beaks better for cracking seeds. The finches consequently sought out ecological niches. In these niches, they were safe from excessive competition. They soon began to mate primarily with other finches that used the same niche. Over the course of many generations, these characteristics were enhanced, enabling the finches to exploit their niches successfully. The differences between the worm diggers and the seed crackers became so large that they were no longer able to mate with one another. Different species emerged as a result. Today there are 14 different species of finch living on the Galapagos Islands, all of which are descended from the same group of stranded finches. This is how new species are created by evolution, through the interaction of unique individuals, the excess production of offspring, recombination and mutation in heredity, and finally, through selection. Why is this so important? It tells us where the variety of life comes from and why living creatures are so perfectly adapted to their habitats. But it also affects us personally. Every person is the result of 3.5 billion years of evolution. And that includes you. Your ancestors fought and adapted in order to survive. This survival was an extremely uncertain thing. If we consider the fact that 99% of all the species that have ever lived are extinct, then you can consider yourself part of a success story. The dinosaurs have disappeared, but you are alive, watching this video. Because you're incredibly special, just like all the other creatures that exist today. irreproducible and unique in the universe.
So to Darwin, natural selection, I know that video is kind of long, but I hope that really explained it, right? Like this idea of like the role of randomness and mutation, right? And selection pressures. I think that video does a good job at showing, kind of actually illustrating this idea of what environmental pressures are. All right, so I'm going to hit you with this last quote, and then we'll say goodbye for now, and part 2 coming soon. All right, I hope you're enjoying the class. I don't know. I don't need to say that, but I do. And these are fun to do. Natural selection is this evolutionary process by which those individuals of a species best adapted, and remember that can mean different things in different situations, to their environment are most likely to survive and reproduce, and therefore pass on genetic material to the next generation. Through this process, Darwin also suggested that emotion, perception, and cognition evolved, right? Develop within one life, evolve over generations. Cheers. See you soon. Have a great afternoon, day, morning. And yeah, see you next time. Part 2 coming soon.